Transformation Tiffany. Hello, hello, hello. Hold on, let me get this off to Rhoda. All right, here we go. I sent it in. Hey, Mildred. Hello, boss lady. Hey, Aretha. Hello, Transformation Tiffany. We're here today. We're about to read the transcript. Hopefully Terry will be on. Hey, Latrice. Mimi's back in class. Okay. What time she get out of class? All right, guys. Let's just hope we get enough folks to read today. Hey, Tanya. I'm dropping the link right now. Thank you, darling. I just dropped the link. Let me call Rhoda, see if she's coming in now.
I'm here. Okay, I have a new AirPod. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get
Oh,
Rhoda.
okay. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you could hear me.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Henny Hen.
How you doing, Tanya?
I'm wonderful. What about you?
I'm good.
Good to hear your voice. It's been a minute.
Yours as well,
Let's get this party started.
right?
How's your day been?
Okay, I'm home on quarantine till Friday.
Oh,
My hairdresser had COVID, so I'm quarantining, bored out of my mind. I'm not used to sitting around like this.
can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me? What?
Okay, guys, I'm back. Oh, we just lost Tanya. Hey, Henny Hen.
Hi, Miss Sylvia. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
There she go.
I don't know how to stop myself from getting phone calls while I'm on.
Mm, I don't know.
Me either. If I try putting it on airplane mode, and then if I do that, then I can't hear, and you guys can't hear me. I don't know. It's weird. iPhones are supposed to be so smart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's a user error.
Mimi's here. I just seen it in the chat. Are you coming to read, Mimi?
Is Terry ignoring us? We have fun Saturday.
I don't know, y'all. I'm just trying to not be too much chatty on these.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Mimi, you have the 20, the 17th.
Yes.
Okay. Rhoda's almost coming in. Just hold on a second, guys. All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Infamous Sylvia channel, where we're reading, reenacting the Robert Sylvester Kelly's trial, Eastern District of New York, and the date that we're doing is September 17th, which is the testimony of Cheryl Mack. And Cheryl Mack, some of you guys may know, she was the personal assistant for Mr. Kelly, and she was the prosecution's um, witness. And what we're going to do, we're going to read the direct the direct examination for Miss Cheryl Mack, and hopefully we're going to just do about 2 hours of the reading. And if we don't finish with this one, we'll continue it tomorrow until we complete her whole testimony, direct as well as cross examination. Candy, do you have the reading?
Yes, I've
You
got
do.
it in
Okay.
front of me. Yes.
September 17th. Okay, we
Yeah.
have
Thank you.
roughly 4 people here. We're just waiting for the judge.
Yeah.
Let's see, we're doing indirect. So, Mimi, do you mind being the witness?
No, that's fine. Yeah.
N-
Fine.
I will. Mimi, you're going to be the witness, or you want me to be the witness? Whichever one. You just
Whoever
let me know.
whoever you guys want me to be is fine.
Yeah, I don't
What page
mind.
are we starting on?
Hi,
From the
Mimi.
beginning, from the beginning.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Hey,
Hi,
hey, hey.
Tanya.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi,
That
Rhoda. Hi, honey.
we have quite a few conversation going on with the judge, and this is going to be the what do you call it? What do you call it? Sidebars? Yeah, sidebars. That's going on in this conversation. We're going to read it in its entirety, and it's with we have Geddes, we have Kanik. Who wants to be Kanik? We have Shahata. We have the court, which is the judge.
Hi, Reg. You all right? Yeah, good. Thank you. You? Good.
Okay, we're going to mute her. Hold on a second.
Ooh.
I got to mute. Let me mute Candy. Okay, she already muted herself. All right. So we need a judge. We need Shahata. Can't Okay, we already have Geddes. We need Tanya, do you want to be the we have Shahata. We don't have a Shahata.
I can be Shahata. It's fine.
All right. So Mimi, you're gonna be Cheryl, and Candy, do you want to be Kanik?
Yeah, anybody. That's fine.
Okay.
Sylvia, thank you. Yeah, I don't
All
mind.
right, y'all. I think we're ready now. And this is for September 17th, 9:30 a.m. It's United States versus Robert Sylvester Kelly. And for the defendant, we have Mr. Kanik, Nicole Blank Becker, Tom Farinella, Calvin Scholar. And for the government, we have Jacqueline Castellis, whatever, Elizabeth Geddes, Nadia Shahata, Maria Cruz Mendez. All right, we're going to start with the clerk. All rise.
Everybody can sit down. All right. Anything before we get started?
Yes, Your Honour. May we approach briefly?
Yes. Do you want the court reporter? Might as well. Is it scheduling or is it?
A little bit of both.
Let's get the court reporter then.
I'll deal with the sorry, one sec. I'll deal with the legal stuff first, Your Honour. It's my understanding the government is going to call a witness this morning, Cheryl Mack. Based on the 302, it seems as though much of her testimony would be hearsay. And there's also going to be a reference to a settlement agreement.
Do you mind holding on a second so I could get my colleague who is putting on Miss Mack?
It's my understanding that the government is going to is going to call a witness this morning, Cheryl Mack. Based on my review of the 302, it seems as though much of her testimony is going to be called for hearsay testimony.
I'm not.
Just tell me who she is.
She knew the defendant in two different periods of time. One when she was a talent manager, including a singer named Precious in 2015 through 19 period, initially with Divine Stevens and became executive, then became his executive assistant. I'm not planning to elicit hearsay. The statements I'm going to elicit regarding Precious and any claims she may have against the defendant will be from what the defendant told her about that and then the defendant's lawyer asked her to sign an affidavit regarding that. So that's where I'm going to elicit those things.
Okay.
Okay.
And I am purposely asking this way so not to elicit hearsay. I may ask her, do you speak to, without telling me what she said, did you speak to Precious? And then that, did you have a conversation with the defendant? I'm not planning to go into hearsay.
Okay.
Excellent. Was there something else?
The other thing is that it's my understanding that they plan on introducing a settlement agreement between Mr. Kelly, Precious, and Precious' mom. And I don't see how they could get that in without.
Well, there will be testimony about claims from what the defendant and the defendant's lawyer said to her about claims that Precious made. And I can tell you, it's not going to be very detailed. The settlement agreement is a business record maintained and it corroborates the testimony. So I do think the law firm has had it.
The settlement record? I mean,
Do you have any certification from that?
We do.
Okay, then I'm fine. Just in terms of scheduling, we will be prepared, Your Honour, for the charge conference Monday afternoon.
okay. Do you have any additional requests to the charge you want to give me?
I think so.
You are putting on a case.
Yes.
So what I usually do is I get the request to charge. We have already got a draft of the charge now, but I would like to get the recent charge, the request charge, give it to the parties, and then have the.
Okay.
Your Honor, ask for us to give any additional ones by some point today.
That was my request.
We don't have the manpower.
So, do you have any idea of how many witnesses you will be calling? It would just help me figure out. I'm thinking of the charge conference. We can do it later on Monday. I'm not sure. Well, let's see. I mean, I have requested initially, and I cannot remember if you were on the team at this point. I think you were, but brand new. I had asked the parties to submit a request to charge before we started.
Yes, I was on.
And I do not think I incorporated all of your requests.
I only had one, and you rejected it. You know, Judge Kaplan Torres, that's where I get that charge from.
He is a fine man.
I think if Kaplan finds it good enough, I don't understand why judges consistently refuse to tell jurors about something important.
That is the Southern District. They are much loftier than we are.
Oh, okay.
But I do know how much additional you will have. But I do not know how much additional you will have. Obviously, there will be some instructions about how to consider various things that have come in, and I will take both of your input on that, on just how the jury is to evaluate various kinds of evidence that came in. I am not sure that a whole lot has changed. I mean, I had stuck an instruction in there about, witness prep, which I may have already, about witnesses having lawyers.
So I think actually those were the two different ones we were planning to submit on. It sounds like you covered it. So
I have a very smart law clerk.
hello, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Just 1 second, everyone. She's I can read her part. Hold on a second.
You want me to?
I got it.
Okay.
Number 4.
I am absolutely certain of that.
I think we will finish early today because my stress won't be.
Okay. Are you doing both of them?
Yes. And then are you anticipating what my request would be regarding summation is that we do it all on one day. I think it would be unfair, the case with all the evidence, to have people give theirs. I mean, the government give theirs, I give mine, and then they had overnight to do rebuttal.
Well, let's see what happens. I would like to do that, but I'm also am very cognizant of the fact that this jury has been sitting for quite some time. And so the other thing I'm concerned about, which is always in the back of my mind, is I do get concerned about COVID. And so it is in everybody's interest to get it moving as quickly as possible. Perhaps I might have said this once myself. As a lawyer, they always think that there's a big advantage about, jurors thinking about something overnight or whatever. I do not happen to think that is such a big deal.
I would just say I'm doing the rebuttal. I actually prefer to do right after. What I will say, if it's 5 o'clock, I don't want to be limited. So if we can start and conclude it the next day, I'm fine with that. But I don't want to be limited to.
Why don't we drive down this bridge when we come to it?
Okay. And I'm just trying to think exactly when we finish today. I would just like to run and get home and just jump in the bed and shower later on.
I have nothing to say about that. All right. Why don't we get the witness?
Our next witness is Cheryl Mack.
Okay.
Your Honor, before we call the witness, I was just going to read a couple of stipulations and enter some exhibits.
Sure. And just with the stipulations, I do not think you have to read the beginning and the end and all that.
I got it.
As great as that stuff.
Your Honor, could we just address one? We can actually do it out loud. We don't need sidebar.
Your Honor, since we're doing stipulations, can we wait to bring the witness in?
Yes.
So, Your Honor, as we discussed at the end, I guess it wasn't last week, but what feels like it, but the end of Wednesday, the government wanted to elicit just a few quick questions from Special Agent Cobot about a 2017 BuzzFeed article, and Your Honor urges us to reach a stipulation. I believe we had reached a stipulation. There's just one dispute. The government wants to include in the stipulation that the article itself included not just allegations by the parents of Jane, but also allegations by the parents of Joy, to help explain why the defendant then engaged in, various tactics to attack his girlfriend's parents, and they engaged. Uh,
And they engaged in that sort of letter writing campaign where they were, numerous allegations, in the government's view, false allegations against those parents. It's my understanding that, and I don't speak for the defense counsel, but I think defense counsel is fine with the inclusion of Jane, but has an issue with including Joy.
Just correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the letters were directed to a different witness's parents.
There were. The letters addressed actually each Jane, Anna, and also Joy's parents. And all of those letters are in evidence, as well as Dominique.
Can I just see the stipulation you have reached, and then maybe
Your Honor, just so you know,
microphone, just so I can hear you.
just so that you know, our objection to the stipulation is just only the portion that deals with the parents of Joy.
Right.
We don't have an objection to Jane's parents.
Sorry.
Jane?
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Why don't you just say Jane's parents and others?
That's fine with us.
yes.
All right.
Can I say another girlfriend or other girlfriend?
Jane's parents, as well as if it is just one other, the parents of another girlfriend.
Yes. Yes.
All right. I feel like that was such an accomplishment.
It was.
And so you want to read the stipulations before we call the witness in.
Yes.
Probably makes more sense than having the person just sitting there. So if we are ready for the jury, let's do that.
All right.
rise.
All rise. You may be seated.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We are ready to resume. I think the government has a few stipulations and then they will call the witness. Go ahead.
Thank you. The government offers the following exhibits. I don't believe there is any objection from defense counsel as to these. 410, 410A, 411, 411A, 641, 645, 913A, 914A, 950, 965A, 948B and C, 400, 162, 974, 233G, H, N, Q, R, S, and T, 342B and C, 329B, 328B, 702, and then 932. And then there are three steps that we are offering right now: 1015, 1016, and 1017, as well as any exhibits that are referenced in the stipulation. And then I would like to read some of the now admitted. Some of these steps were previously entered, Your Honor. All of the exhibits are entered into evidence.
Oh, sorry. I guess I assumed Are you stipulating to them? It does not matter. They are in. Okay. All those exhibits are in.
Just one moment. All right. And if I called a witness as a witness, and this is government's exhibit 1006, if called as a witness at trial, a representative of DuPont Asian Films would testify as follows. A component part of all VHS tapes is polyester films. DuPont and its successor in titles including DTF, which is DuPont Films, manufacturing polyester films, including Mylar, that was a component of VHS tapes in and before 1999. Neither DuPont nor its successors entitled entities had any plants used to manufacture polyester film in the state of Illinois. Well, in and before 1999, there were entities, in addition to DuPont and its successors, entities that manufactured the polyester film used in all VHS tapes. All of these entities were located outside of the state of Illinois and manufactured polyester films outside the state of Illinois. And also, if called as a witness at trial, a representative of Canon would testify that Canon camcorders manufactured between 1997 and 2010, including Canon XL 1S Mini DV digital video cassette, were manufactured with components and materials from outside the state of Illinois, including components and materials from outside the United States. And Government's Exhibit 10. Government's Exhibit 1001 is a stipulation that includes, if called as a witness at trial, Imugula Packy would testify as follows. Packy is an assistant manager of the Sheraton Suites Chicago O'Hare, a hotel located at 6501 North Mannheim Road, Rosemont, Illinois. A Sheraton hotel has been located at that address since in or before 1994. Government's Exhibit 1015 includes the following if called as a witness at trial. David Fish, Esquire, would testify as follows. David Fish obtained a cellular telephone and a t-shirt, which t-shirt he identified as Government's Exhibit 241. Hereinafter, the t-shirt from the Logan's Law Firm in Chicago, Illinois, on or about June 10, 2013. The Fish Law Firm maintained the cellular telephone and t-shirt until November 17, 2017, when it returned both items to Miss Pace. If called as a witness at trial, Detective Donald Dean with the Olympia Fields Police Department would testify as follows. On November 18, 2017, Miss Pace provided a cellular telephone and a t-shirt, which she identified as Government's Exhibit 241, to the Olympia Fields Police Department. The Olympia Fields Police Department maintained the cellular telephone and t-shirt until February 13th of 2019, when it provided the cellular telephone and t-shirt to Anna Doyle, an investigator at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. If called as a witness at trial, investigator Anna, we are going to make, 62. I'm missing a page.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Investigator Anna Doyle would testify as following. On February 13th of 2019, Investigator Anna Doyle with Cook County State's Attorney's Office provided a t-shirt which she identified as Government's Exhibit 241 to the Illinois State Police.
Slow down a little bit.
Sorry.
That is all right.
The Illinois State Police Division of Forensic Science. Government Exhibit 1016, another stipulation, includes the following. Government Exhibit 902 is an excerpt from the video with a title card stating R. Kelly, born in the 90s, dot groove, length is 57 minutes and 50 seconds. First air date, May 5th of 1993. Executive producer is Billy Woodruff, producer, and Adrian J. Smith. Editor is Tracy Branson. The video from Government Exhibit 902 the video from which Government Exhibit 902 was excerpted first aired on BET Network on May 5th of 1993. And finally, Government's Exhibit 1017 is a stipulation that includes in July 2017, BuzzFeed published an article describing allegations against the defendant, Robert Sylvester Kelly, which allegations have been lodged by the parents of an individual who testified in trial as Jane and the parents of another defendant's girlfriend, Your Honor. There is one more exhibit, which I think you have that. You want me to go ahead and finish, Geddes, which I think
we are going to make some additional redactions too, and we will enter that after the next witness.
All right.
Your Honor, there is one item that we...
Can I just ask you to speak into the microphone?
There's one item that we stipulated to, I think, the 702. In reviewing it, I realised that there is some extraneous notes on it. We are not stipulating to those notes. We are just stipulating to the document itself.
That's fine. We can redact the notes.
Okay.
Okay. Other than that, are we ready to go? All right. Why don't you call your next witness?
the government calls Cheryl Mack.
Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give will be truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Okay. Just before we begin, I just want to give you a couple of guidelines for testimony. First, you can take your mask off so we can hear you better because we have got the plexiglass there. The first thing is, let's move the microphone a little bit closer to you. If it is easier, you can actually take the microphone off the stand. I think some people find it easier to speak into it that way, but it is entirely up to you. So I do want to make sure the jurors can hear you, and I want to make sure the court reporter gets down what you have to say. So please do not speak too quickly and do not speak over whichever lawyer is asking you questions. If a lawyer does ask you a question that is not clear or you need to have it repeated, just let me know and I will have them straighten it out. And just do your best to answer only the question you are being asked. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead. I do not think your microphone is on though. So just tap the end of it. Oh, maybe it is. Great. All right. Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Did you receive a subpoena to testify today?
Yes.
Do you want to be here today?
No.
How far did you go in school?
College.
And after college, well, first, what type of degree did you receive in college?
Business management.
And after college, did you work in corporate jobs for a period of time?
I did. I worked in corporate America, yes.
And at some point, did you start working professionally in talent management?
Yes.
And around when was that?
The latter part of 1998, 99.
And what type of work did you do in talent manage?
I scout talent. I manage talent, pretty much.
And when you started to work in talent management, did you form your own company?
Yes.
And did you start to work with various clients, artists in the entertainment industry?
Yes.
I'm showing you what is in evidence as Government Exhibit 1. Do you recognize this person? If you look, there is a screen in front of you.
I do not think
It's in evidence.
it is in evidence. Okay.
Why isn't the screen working? Okay. All right. Do you see something on your screen?
No.
I think it's Canon. Your Honor, our screens are off.
There we go.
Okay, now I see. Okay, now do you see it?
Yes.
Do you recognize the person in Government Exhibit 1?
Yes.
Who is that?
Robert Kelly.
And have you met Mr. Kelly in person?
Yes.
Do you see Robert Kelly in the courtroom here today?
Yes.
Can you please identify him by an item of clothing he's wearing?
Black jacket.
Well, a couple of people there have a black jacket.
Can you point him out for us?
The second from the right.
Indicating the defendant.
Thank you. Around when did you first meet the defendant?
Around 2005.
And were you working as a talent manager at that time?
Yes.
And what city were you in when you first met him?
Asheville, Tennessee.
Did you meet him in 2005? Did you attend the Video Music or did you attend events surrounding the Video Music Awards, the MTV Awards in Miami?
Yes.
And did you meet him there or did you meet him sometime prior to that?
There.
Okay. And was that in 2005?
Yes.
And do you recall around when in 2005 this was?
It was August. It was the weekend of Hurricane Katrina.
And how was it that you ended up meeting the defendant in 2015 in Miami, August of 2015 in Miami?
I was in a restaurant with my artist at that time, and there was a gentleman that came over to the table, and we were sitting at, and said we looked pretty important. Asked what we do, what we were doing. I explained that I was a manager. I had my talent there. He said, "Oh, pretty interesting. Can she really sing?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I would like to introduce you to somebody."
And who was the singer that was with you at that time?
Sherry Hall.
And after that, what happened?
After that, he left and he came back to the table and he said, "Are you guys ready?" And we said yes. And he walked us back to the table. It was a table in the back. And that is where he introduced myself and my artist to Mr. Kelly.
And after you were introduced to the defendant, what happened?
So after that, she sang for him. He asked if he could sing a song for him. She did. She did amazing. He asked her to do another song, and she did. She did amazing job. And he asked her to do a third one, and she did. And again, amazing.
And when you say he, are you referring to the defendant?
That is correct.
And the person who was singing was your client, Sherry?
Yes.
During that encounter with the defendant, did you exchange contact information with the defendant?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did the defendant tell you about calling him?
He said first, he said, "Let me help you. I see what you're trying to do." He gave me his number and said to keep calling. If you don't get me, just keep trying until I answer.
And did you understand that well, what, if anything, did he say about your client singing?
He said she was amazing.
And after that day, did you in fact call the defendant?
Yes.
And did you discuss your client Sherry with him over the phone?
He had already met Sherry, for it was brief. We discussed her coming to Chicago in the studio,
Whose studio?
Mr. Kelly's.
And did you and Sherry in fact travel to Chicago to go to the defendant's studio?
Yes.
And do you recall where it was that you first met with the defendant in the Chicago area?
Olympia Fields.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 502A and 502C. Do you recognize these photos?
Yes.
And what are these photos of?
The Olympia Fields home.
And is that where the studio you went to was located?
Yes.
Now, after you and Sherry met the defendant at his Olympia Field studio in the home, did the defendant end up working with Sherry?
Yes.
And what type of work was that?
She collaborated with him on a song for his album.
Now, at a certain point of time, did Sherry stop working with the defendant?
Yes.
And after she stopped working with the defendant, did you introduce the defendant to other artists?
After a period of time, yes.
I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 71. Without saying this person's name, do you know this person?
Yes.
And do you know this person's first name, true first name, and last name?
Yes.
I move to admit Government Exhibit 71.
Any objection?
Did we lose count? No objections.
Okay, that is in evidence.
And may we publish it?
Yes.
Now, I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 71A. Is this the same photo that I just showed you in Government Exhibit 71 with this individual's true first and last name?
Yes.
I move to admit Government Exhibit 71A.
Any objection?
No objection.
No objection.
Okay, that is in evidence.
And I would ask to publish it to the jury only, please.
Okay.
And for the purposes of your testimony here today, we are going to refer to this individual as Precious, okay?
Okay.
I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government's Exhibit 71B. In the same photo in the two exhibits I just showed you with the name Precious written underneath.
Yes.
I move to admit Government's Exhibit 71B. No objections.
No objection.
Okay.
Okay, those are in evidence.
Now, at some point, were you Precious's talent manager?
Yes.
And what kind of artist was Precious?
She was R&B with a little hip hop. She was a rapper and a singer. She did both.
And around when did you begin managing Precious?
2009.
How old was Precious when you began managing her?
17.
And what city were you in when you first met Precious?
Atlanta.
And when you first met Precious, who, if anyone, was she with?
Her mother.
Now, after you met Precious, what, if any, discussions did you have with the defendant about Precious?
I had a discussion with him about her talent. She was talented. Would you be interested in meeting her?
And that's what you asked the defendant?
Mm-hmm. She was an artist on the rise.
And how, if at all, did the defendant respond?
He agreed.
And where did he agree to Well, did you discuss where the defendant would meet Precious?
Studio
Which studio?
in Olympia Fields.
Okay, so after that conversation, did you, well, who, if anyone, did you travel to Olympia Fields with to meet with the defendant?
Precious and her mother.
And was this when Precious was still 17?
Yes.
And you testified that you, Precious, and her mother went to Olympia Fields to see the defendant. Is that right?
Yes.
And when you went to Olympia Fields to visit with the defendant, was there any identification check for any of you when you went into the Olympia Fields property?
No.
Now, what happened after? Well, did you, what happened when you met with the defendant, Precious and her, when you, Precious and her mother met with the defendant in Olympia Field?
So she showcased her music for him, and he went into the studio and started listening to more music, the three of us.
At any point during what, well, if anything, did the defendant agree to do regarding Precious at this meeting?
He did agree to work with her. He thought she was talented enough, yes.
And what, if anything, did the defendant say to you, Precious, and her mom about the use of his studio by Precious?
He did agree to let us use one of the studios at Olympia Fields, and we probably started to work a couple of months after that.
And when you, Precious, and her mother traveled to Olympia Fields, where did the three of you travel from?
Atlanta,
And is that where you were living at the time?
yes.
At that time of your travel for the first meeting between Precious and the defendant in Olympia Fields, where was Precious and her mother living at that time?
They were living in Atlanta at that time.
And at some point, did Precious begin working out of the defendant's residence in Olympia Fields from the studio there?
Yes.
And by the way, where was Precious and her mother? Where were they originally from?
Chicago.
Okay. And at some point, when Precious began working at the studio in Olympia Fields, where, if anywhere, did she stay?
At a hotel.
A hotel where?
In probably 2 miles from the studio.
From the Olympia Fields studio?
Yes.
And who paid for the hotel Precious stayed in?
I believe Mr. McDavid.
And do you know Mr. McDavid's full name?
Daryl McDavid.
And what, if any, connection to the defendant did Daryl McDavid have at that time?
His manager.
Now, you testified earlier that Precious and her mom were living in Atlanta when you met them, and when you initially went to meet to introduce Precious to the defendant in Olympia Fields, correct?
Correct.
And you also testified she and her mother were originally from Chicago, correct?
Correct.
At some point, did Precious' mom move back to Chicago?
Yes.
And was this while Precious was working with the defendant at his studios?
Yes.
And when that happened, did Precious remain staying at the hotel near the Olympia Fields residence?
Yes.
Now, you indicated you were based in Atlanta at the time, correct?
Correct.
And did you continue to manage Precious while she was working at the Olympia Fields studio?
Yes.
And how was it that you would do that from Atlanta?
I would come in and out of the city. I didn't stay there.
So you would travel from Atlanta?
I would travel from Atlanta to Chicago in and out of the city.
And when you travel in and out of Chicago, did you go to the defendant's Olympia Fields residence?
Yes.
Okay, I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 72. Without saying this person's name, do you recognize this person?
Yes.
And have you met this person?
Yes.
And do you know this person's first and last name?
Yes.
I'm showing this witness and the jury only what's been marked for identification. What's in the evidence is Government Exhibit 72A, jury only. Is this the same photo I just showed you with this individual's true first and last name?
Yes.
And did this individual go by the nickname V?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 72B. Is this the same photo as I just showed you with the nickname V underneath?
Yes.
I move to admit Government Exhibit 72B.
No objection.
That is in evidence.
And may we publish it, please?
Yes.
And for the purpose of your testimony here today, we will refer to this person as V, okay?
Okay.
And how do you know V?
I met V in Atlanta. We were looking for songwriters for Precious Project. I interviewed about 3 or 4. She was a pretty on the rise songwriter there. She had placements already. I met her. She was amazing, and I figured she would be great for the project.
And when you say Precious's project, what are you referring to?
We were working in the studio on Precious' album, her project,
In which studios?
Olympia Fields.
The defendant studios?
Yes.
And after you met V, did you hire her? What did you do after you met V?
After I met her, she sent probably about 16 songs. They were all good, and I shared a little bit about, her music, her songwriting ability with Mr. Kelly. She came, flew out. She and Precious met, and they started writing together immediately.
And when you say she came, did V come from Atlanta to Chicago?
She flew from Atlanta to Chicago, yes.
And how old was V at the time that she began working with Precious as a songwriter?
19.
And after you've hired V, where, if anywhere, did she move to?
Chicago.
And where did she stay in Chicago?
Initially, she was at the same hotel, I believe.
The same hotel as who?
As Precious initially, and at a later time, she was living, I believe, at Olympia Fields or the studio. I'm not sure exactly.
I'm going to ask that if she's not sure that it be stricken.
You don't know where she was living?
Not initially.
I think you testified initially that she was at the hotel. Is that right?
Initially, she was at the hotel, but initially, she was at the same hotel as Precious.
Are you aware of when she moved someplace else?
At one point in time, she actually moved to one of the studios, I believe.
All right.
Yes.
Now, you testified earlier that Precious was working on a project or an album while at the Olympia Fields. Is that right?
Yes.
At some point, did you learn that Precious stopped working with the defendant at his studio?
Yes.
And as her manager, were you involved in that decision?
No.
Was it at an abrupt decision?
Yes.
And without telling me or telling us what specifically you learned, did you speak to Precious about her having stopped working with the defendant?
At some point, yes.
And after speaking, at some point after speaking with Precious, did you speak with the defendant about the fact that Precious had left?
Yes.
And was that initially over the phone?
Yes.
And what do you recall about that conversation with the defendant?
It was all of a sudden. He told me that I needed to come to Chicago. When she left, it was just everything happened so fast. He told me that she was trying to file a lawsuit and I needed to pick a team.
Now, you testified that he told you that you needed to come to Chicago. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And where were you at that time when you got that phone call?
Atlanta.
And did you, in fact, shortly thereafter fly from Atlanta to Chicago?
Yes.
And where did you go after arriving in Chicago, I'm sorry?
To Olympia Fields, to the studio.
What happened when you got to the Olympia Fields?
So when I got there, we talked about what could possibly be going on with Precious, and could you repeat it?
When you say we talked, who is the we in that sentence?
Mr. Kelly and I.
And what did Mr. Kelly tell you at that time?
Well, he explained to me that Precious had filed a lawsuit, and it was right around him going to the World Cup. It was important. He told me, again, that I needed to pick a team, and generally, these types of situations, people come up missing.
That's what the defendant told you, that people come up missing?
Yes,
And he said that to you after you said you needed to pick a team?
yes.
And what did you understand him to mean by you needed to pick a team?
Meaning either Team Precious or Team Mr. Kelly.
Did the defendant say anything to you about what the potential lawsuit was about?
Something along the lines of sexual harassment.
You said that this was around the time that the defendant was going to the World Cup.
Yes,
And were you talking about the International FIFA Soccer World Cup?
yes,
And was the defendant scheduled to perform at the World Cup that year?
yes.
Now, when you first started the conversation with the defendant, do you recall where in the Olympic Field residence you were?
We started the conversation in the studio.
And at a certain point, did the conversation with the defendant move from the studio to another location?
To the pool area.
And is that an indoor pool area?
Yes.
And how did that move come about, if you recall?
I don't. We just. I don't recall.
Now, when the defendant told you to pick a team and told you that people go missing in these circumstances, what did you understand the defendant to mean when he said that to you?
I don't recall.
Well, how did you take that statement?
I took it as a threat.
After that happened, or if at all, did that conversation end?
So after that, some point. uh, So after that, at some point, Mr. Arnold, we go back inside, and I went up to the pool area. There was a pool table area, and it was late. At some point, Mr. Arnold comes, knocks the door, and tells me to come downstairs and get in the car, and we drive down. We drive downtown at this point.
Okay, so let me stop you for a moment. You said you went to an area. After the conversation with the defendant, you went to an area in the Olympic Fields residence with a pool table. Is that right?
Yes,
And what did you go there, or who, if anyone, suggested that you go there?
Mr. Kelly.
And what, if anything, did he suggest you do? Did you go to do there? I'm sorry.
Well, I believe he was working, so just wait there. And it was late, and then Tom came in.
So, and about how long about after your conversation with the defendant did Tom come in?
It was a few hours. It wasn't right away. It was a few hours.
And you mentioned a Tom and a Mr. Arnold. Are those the same people that you're referring to?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as government exhibit
31. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
Who is that?
Tom. Tom Arnold.
And that's the person that
Yes.
Came after a couple of hours after you talked to the defendant?
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Who is Tom Arnold to the defendant at that time?
I understood him to be his assistant.
And you testified, well, what, if anything, did Tom Arnold say to you when he came to the room?
He basically said that.
Objection.
Sustained.
Where, if anywhere, did you go after Tom Arnold came to the room?
I went to the car that was parked and he drove me downtown.
And who is the he?
Mr. Arnold.
And when you got into the car, did you know where you were going specifically or for what purpose?
Nope.
And where did Tom Arnold take you?
To Mr. Ed Jensen's office downtown.
Downtown Chicago?
Yes.
And what happened after you arrived at the building where the office was located?
So when we arrived at the building, Mr. Arnold got me out of the car. We opened the car, pushed an elevator door, and up the floor, and Mr. Gensom greeted me onto the floor.
After you got out of the elevator?
After I got out of the elevator,
And who did you stand Ed Jensen to be?
Mr. Kelly's lawyer.
After he greeted you, where, if anywhere, did you go in that office?
We went to his office.
Mr. Jensen's office.
That's correct.
And what happened in Mr. Jensen's office?
Well, he explained that there was a lawsuit on the table and he asked me several questions. And
Did he reference who this lawsuit or potential lawsuit pertained to?
yes,
And who was that?
Precious.
And while you were in Mr. Jensen's office, did he present you with any documents?
Yes.
What document did he present you with?
It was some form of an affidavit.
And was it already written when you entered the office?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did he ask you to do with the respect to the document?
There were about 4, maybe 5 questions. They were yes or no. He asked me to sign it.
Were the questions already answered when he asked you to sign it?
No.
What do you recall about, well, did you read the affidavit before you signed it?
No.
Did you read any part of it before you signed it?
Maybe a couple of the questions, yes.
And do you recall anything about what was in the document?
The couple of questions that I do recall reading were, did I ever see Mr. Kelly give her alcohol, or did I ever see them perform sex?
And when you say her, are you referring to Precious?
Yes.
And when you say them, are you referring to the defendant and Precious?
Yes.
Now, was this a typed document?
It was typed, yes.
And I think you testified that these were yes or no questions.
Yes.
Did you write anything on the document other than signing it?
No.
Okay, so were the questions already answered?
They weren't already answered, no. They were already typed.
Okay, but you did not provide answers to the questions.
I don't recall.
I'm still unclear about the affidavit. When you say there were yes or no questions, was it a situation that you would check in the yes or no box or circle a yes or no? Do you recall?
I don't recall. It was circle yes. The question would be, did you see Mr. Kelly give her alcohol, yes or no?
Okay. And so if a person were filling that out, the person would circle one of those two answers. Is that right?
Correct.
Did you, do you recall if you ever circled any of the answers?
I don't recall, but I don't recall.
Okay.
Only one way or the other. I don't recall.
Liar.
Now, did you sign the document?
I did.
And did you, when you left Mr. Jensen's office that day, did you have a copy of the document with you?
No.
And where, if anywhere, did you go after signing the affidavit and leaving Mr. Jensen's office that day?
To the airport.
And where did you go from there?
Back to Atlanta.
And did you speak with, well, did a period of time pass after that when you did have communication with either Precious or the defendant?
Yes.
Now, without telling me what you learned at some point, did you later learn that Precious' legal claims against the defendant were resolved in some way?
Yes.
Now, I want to direct your attention to approximately 2013. Was this now several years after the incident, after the events you described in Mr. Jensen's office?
Yes.
In approximately 2013, did you reconnect with the defendant sometime during that year?
Yes.
And what were you doing for work at that time?
I was an executive assistant for Diane Stevens.
And who was Divine Stevens? What type of work did he do?
He was a music mogul, entertainment manager, producer in Atlanta.
And you testified you were Mr. Stevens' executive assistant?
Yes.
And were you on his payroll at that time?
Yes.
And what, if anything, well, withdrawn, how was it that you ended up reconnecting with the defendant sometime in 2013?
Divine and I were having a discussion about doing something different, and Divine thought Robert would be Mr. Kelly would be a perfect candidate. He felt like we could really get him off the bench, his exact words.
What do you mean, get him off the bench?
Meaning that he wasn't as active as normal.
Meaning in the music business?
In the music business, yes.
And at some point, well, who, if anyone, after you and Divine have that, Mr. Stevens have that conversation, who, if anyone, or how did you go about on you, or how did you go about on you, how, if at all, did you reach out to the defendant?
There was a mutual contact that Divine and Mr. Kelly knew, and they met at his home, and we were all there. They hit it off, and we went to work.
And after that, what type of work did Divine Stevens, and with you as his executive assistant, what type of work did you do with respect to the defendant?
I don't understand the question.
I will rephrase it. So you testified that there was a meeting at a house of a mutual friend of Mr. Stevens and the defendant,
Yes.
and that and that they hit it off there. Is that right?
Yes.
And at that meeting or after that meeting, did Mr. Stevens and you begin working with the defendant?
Yes.
And in what capacity What type of work was Mr. Stevens doing with the defendant at that time?
Management.
And you were also working on that as Mr. Stevens' executive assistant.
That's correct, yes.
And during that course of time, what types of things did you and Mr. Stevens work on?
So we worked on touring, putting together a tour for Mr. Kelly. We worked on an album for Mr. Kelly, and that's kind of how we started.
And what, if any, use of Mr. Stevens' home did the defendant have at that time?
Mr. Stevens built a studio in his home, specifically for Mr. Kelly.
And did the defendant use that studio?
Yes.
Did Mr. Stevens' home also have a basketball court?
Yes.
And did the defendant use that basketball court?
Yes.
Now, at some point, did you transition from being on Mr. Stevens' payroll as his executive assistant to working exclusively for the defendant?
Yes.
And in what capacity did you work for the defendant?
I don't understand the question.
What kind of work did you do for the defendant after you stopped being on Mr. Stevenson's payroll?
So I managed his calendar. I worked on all of the projects alongside Mr. Stevens. We did, again, we worked on the album. We worked on with songwriters. We put together tours. I was right there alongside Divine, working just as aggressive as he was.
Now, what, if any, role did Mr. Stevens have with respect to hiring any staff for the defendant?
So we were challenged with getting a lawyer. Mr. Kelly wanted a new lawyer based in Chicago. We hired a stylist, and that was immediate.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 44. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
And who is that?
Linda Mensch.
Who is Linda Meach?
She was Mr. Kelly's lawyer at that time.
Is that the lawyer that you and Mr. Stevens helped to hire?
Yes.
I got it, Henny. And what type of lawyer was she?
Entertainment lawyer.
Did she hire any staff for the defendant?
Yes.
Who did she hire?
She hired a bookkeeper,
What was the bookkeeper's name?
Joanne Sullivan.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 37. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
Who is that?
Joanne Sullivan.
The bookkeeper?
Yes.
And you mentioned you and Mr. Stevens helped to hire a stylist. Is that right?
Yes.
Who was the stylist you hired?
Cash Howard.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 86. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
And who is that?
Cash Howard.
The stylist?
Yes.
And you mentioned Joan Sullivan, the bookkeeper. What was Joan Sullivan's role? What was she hired to do?
She was hired to oversee the books, oversee most of the financials. She worked very close with Linda, so I don't know exactly what her role was, but it started as a bookkeeper.
After the attorney Linda Mitch came on board, what, if any, company was created?
RSK Enterprises.
And what does RSK stand for?
Robert Sylvester Kelly Enterprises.
And around when was RSK Enterprise created?
Mid-early 2014.
And prior to the creation of RSK Enterprises, are you aware of any other companies that the defendant was associated with?
Bass Productions.
Bass Productions?
Bass Productions.
To
Bass Productions, sorry.
okay. To your knowledge, what, if any, involvement did Daryl McDavid have in Bass Productions?
I don't recall.
Now, when you and Mr. Stevens began working with the defendant in 2013, what, if any, role did Daryl McDavid have at that time?
I don't believe he was actively involved.
What, if anything, did the defendant say to you regarding his relationship with Daryl McDavid at that time?
We didn't discuss Mr. McDavid.
Now, after you began working, you and Mr. Stevens began working with the defendant at some point in 2013. What, if anything, changed about the defendant's living situation after you began working with him?
He eventually moved to Atlanta.
And initially, where was the defendant staying in Atlanta?
Hotels.
And did that change at some point?
Yes.
Well, how did that change?
So Divine and I thought that the hotel expenses were just astronomical with that much of a team. So most there was part-time. He was at Divine's place and there were a couple of condos in Atlanta and ultimately a home there.
And did the defendant lease or buy the home there, if you know?
Lease.
And do you recall where the home was located?
It was in
Delu-
Duluth, Georgia,
Do you recall the address or the street?
405 Old Homestead Road.
And you mentioned that the hotel bills were what you called, what you testified that you believed they were astronomical when when the defendant was initially staying at hotels in Atlanta. Is that right?
Yes,
And I think you said something about the number of people that were traveling with him. Is that right?
correct.
Who who, if anyone, traveled with the defendant when he came to Atlanta? And I should say that to the extent you mention any girlfriends, please use first names.
His uncle, June Brown. I believe his nephew, Van. Another one, I can't remember the name, Security.
And did any assistants travel with the defendant that you recall?
There is Michelle Adams, Diana. I can't remember her last name.
All right. So I'm showing you starting with government's exhibit 3. Do you recognize this person?
Yes,
And who is that?
June Brown.
And what, if any, role did? And I think you just testified that that was one of the people that was traveling with the defendant.
Yes, correct.
And what, if any, role did June Brown have?
He was Mr. Kelly's assistant.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as government exhibit. Do you recognize this person?
Yes,
Who is that?
Junebug.
And do you know Junebug's real name?
I don't.
And what, if any, role did Junebug have with the defendant?
I believe he was an assistant.
And I think you also testified earlier, was he also the defendant's uncle?
That's correct, yes.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as government exhibit. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
And who is that?
Van.
And what, if any, role did Van have with the defendant?
I don't know exactly what his role was.
And I think you testified earlier that Van was the defendant's nephew. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 36. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
And who is that?
Diana.
And what, if any, role did Diana have with respects to the defendant?
Personal assistant or house assistant.
Now, apart from employees and family members, did any women travel with the defendant to Atlanta as well?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you a few photographs. I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 69B. Without saying is the name of this person, do you recognize without saying is the name of this person, do you recognize this person?
Yes.
Do you know her full name without saying it?
Yes.
Okay. And what is her first name only?
Dominique.
And is she one of the women that travel with the defendant to Atlanta?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 52B. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
And without saying, well, do you know a nickname that this person used?
Yes.
And what was that nickname?
Juice.
And Juice was one of the women who traveled with the defendant to Atlanta?
Yes.
Did you have an occasion to meet Juice's mother?
One occasion.
I'm showing you the witness only what's been marked for identification as Government Exhibit 53. Do you recognize the individual in this photograph?
Yes.
And who is this?
Her mother, Juice's mother.
I move to admit Government Exhibit 53.
No objection.
That is in evidence.
May we publish it, please?
Yes.
And I'm showing you what's been marked for what's in the evidence as Government Exhibit 72B. Is this the individual you previously testified about, the songwriter V, correct?
Yes.
Was she one of the women who traveled with the defendant to Atlanta?
Yes.
Now, I'm also showing you what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 8. Do you recognize this person?
Yes.
And who do you recognize that to be?
Gerald Jones.
And did he go by any other nicknames?
Blackie.
And what, if any, relationship to the defendant did Blackie have?
He was acting manager
In what time period?
during 2013.
Now, you testified earlier that there was a period of time where you transitioned to working basically exclusively as the defendant's executive assistant. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you recall around when that was?
Early 2014. The latter part of the 2013, early part of 2014.
And once you transitioned to that role, did you have any responsibilities regarding to making travel arrangements for the defendant's guest?
I'm sorry. Repeat the question.
After you transitioned to working as the defendant's executive assistant, did you have any responsibility with respects to making travel arrangements for the defendant's guest?
Yes.
And what did that entail?
Could you
Sure. What did you do with respect to making travel arrangements?
Are you asking how it would come about or what was the process of doing it?
I'm asking both.
Okay. So I would get a text message from a person, a potential traveler, to initiate a travel conversation via text.
And what, if anything, would you do after getting that initial text from a potential traveler?
I would ask for their information, name, date of birth, departure, city.
And what, if anything, would you do after that?
I would get approved to book from Mr. Kelly.
And if you, in fact, received approval to make a booking, how did you go about doing that?
In most instances, we would use the travel company preferred travel. If it was after hours or late or something that needed to happen urgent and couldn't reach them, we would do it. I would do it.
And what, if any, credit card would you use for those circumstances?
The company credit card,
The company credit card?
yes.
And other than you, are you aware of anyone else who had a company credit card?
Lena Minch, Joan Sullivan,
And when you say company credit card, are you referring to RSK Enterprises?
yes,
Okay. And did you get such requests from potential travelers often via text?
yes,
And you mentioned you often used preferred travel to make the arrangements. Is that right?
correct,
And did preferred travel, that was a company that RSK Enterprises used regularly.
correct,
And did they have RSK debit or credit card on file?
yes,
Now, are you familiar with the Black Panties tour?
yes.
And whose tour was that? What artist did the Black Panties tour?
Mr. Kelly,
And around when did that tour take place, if you recall?
I don't recall exactly when.
Did you ever travel as a part of that tour?
Yes,
And how did you get from city to city on that tour?
I flew
And how did the defendant travel from city to city on that tour?
on the tour bus.
After the Black Panties tour, were there a series of on-off performance dates that the defendant did?
Yes,
And can you explain to the jury what that means and one-off performance?
they were initially in the industry called spot dates, and they're random dates that booking agent will book. In some instances, it could be near a city that he's already in or just left. But there were spot dates, so there were no 5 dates in a row. It's just spot dates.
And did the defendant have certain spot dates or concert dates in 2015?
Yes,
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 75. Without saying this person's name, do you recognize this person?
yes,
And do you know this person's first and last name?
yes,
I'm showing the witness and the jury only what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 75A. All right. Is this a photo, the same photo with this person's true first and last name underneath?
yes,
I'm showing the witness, I'm showing everybody what's in evidence as Government Exhibit 75B. For purposes of your testimony here today, we're going to refer to this person as Jane, okay?
okay.
Now, about when did you first become aware of Jane?
In April 2015,
And how did you become aware of her?
I received a text message from her.
And what was the text message about?
Mr. Kelly gave her my number. She text messaged me to book travel.
And I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 233C. Jury only, please. I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 233B. Are these text messages messages you just referred to between you and Jane?
Yes,
And is the first one dated April 28th, 2015? That's an outgoing message from Jane to you.
yes,
And in response, well, she gives you her name and she says that she's in Orlando, Florida currently. And then in response, you say, okay, please send me your date of birth for air travel and then travel tomorrow or question mark.
Yes.
And did she then send you her date of birth, December 30th, 1997, and say, yes, a flight for tomorrow?
Yes.
And just looking down on the text messages, did you then, well, after you received that information from Jane, what did you do?
So after I received that information, I ran it by Mr. Kelly to approve it.
And did he, in fact, approve it?
Yes.
And after he approved it, did you make travel arrangements for Jane to travel?
Yes.
And just looking back at Government Exhibit 233C, is the last text message a text message from you to Jane confirming she's on American Airlines flight that departs Orlando at 7 a.m. to arrive in Los Angeles?
Yes.
And you sent her the confirmation number.
Yes.
Now, at some point, did you meet Jane in person?
Yes.
And do you recall where it was that you met Jane in person?
Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas.
And what, if anything, was the defendant doing in Las Vegas at that time?
A show.
And where physically did you meet Jane in Las Vegas?
In the lobby of Mandalay Bay.
And what was she doing at that time?
I'm sorry?
What was Jane doing when you met her in the lobby at that time?
What was she doing?
Well, let me rephrase the question. What was the purpose of you meeting her in the lobby at the time?
She was checking into her hotel to make sure I was there to make sure everything went smooth through check-in.
And do you recall whether Jane attended the show in Las Vegas?
Yes.
Yes, she attended?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 233G. Okay, this can be published to everyone. Are these text messages between you and Jane from when she was in Las Vegas in 2015?
Yes.
And are these text messages dated May 3rd of 2015?
Yes.
Now, the first text message, 5879, that's on this exhibit, is that a message you received from Jane that said, do you know where the closest mall is?
Yes.
And then you provided her with some information, correct?
Correct.
And then she also asked how she could get to the mall, McDonald's and Western Union, correct?
Correct.
And then your response is after that, and you ask her what time, and then she responds now, anytime soon, if possible. And then you respond, okay, stand by. Now, just going down a little bit, did you inform her that there was some issues with getting a car service? Is that right?
Yes. Correct.
And I want to focus on the text message 5837. That's a text message from you to Jane that states, trying to figure it out. Is Mr. Kelly okay with you going out of the room? It's very hectic out. And then Jane responds, I didn't ask him, and if you can't get it, it's fine. I'll just chill inside because the taxi lines are hectic. Thank you for your help. And then your response, oh, okay, yeah, we will need to make sure it's okay. And it's just very, very hectic. I can get McDonald's to you, no problem. When you said we will need to make sure it's okay, what were you referring to there?
What I meant by that was she need to get an okay from Mr. Kelly.
And how did you know that she needed to get an okay from Mr. Kelly?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, so when you were working for the defendant as his executive assistant, were there certain rules in place?
Yes.
And what, if any, rules were there in place regarding a situation like the one we just looked at on the text messages?
Mr. Kelly would have to approve it.
Now, I would like to direct your attention to July of 2015. Did you travel to see the defendant perform in Connecticut around that time?
Yes.
And do you recall where the defendant was performing in Connecticut in July of 2015, on July 15th, I'm sorry,
It was a casino.
and using first names only for the pseudonym we just went through? Did any female guests also travel to Connecticut to see the defendant?
Yes.
And using first names only, or for the pseudonym Jane, who do you recall? What female guest do you recall traveling to Connecticut?
Jane, Jocelyn, and Christy Lee.
I'm showing you what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 78. Do you recognize this person and using first names only?
Yes.
And who is it?
Jocelyn.
Now, in Connecticut, when the defendant was performing, you testified the defendant was performing at a casino. Is that right?
Correct.
And do you recall approximately how many shows was he doing at the casino?
I believe it was 3 nights, 2 or 3 nights.
And to the best of your recollection, were there any shows in between the shows in Connecticut?
New Jersey.
There was a show in New Jersey?
Yes.
Now, I want to direct your attention to the final show in Connecticut. First of all, were you at that show?
Yes.
And after the show, where were you physically?
The dressing room area.
And who, if anyone else, was in the dressing room area?
Everyone was in the security was there. I believe the majority of the staff was there.
And was the defendant there?
Yes.
And what happened? Well, while you were in the dressing room, did the defendant ask you to do anything?
I don't understand the question.
Okay. So while you were there, after the show in Connecticut, you said, well, you testified you were in the dressing room. The defendant was there and lots of other people were there. Is that right?
Yes.
And at some point, did the defendant, while you were in that room, did the defendant ask you to make sure someone else was in the room?
Yes. To make sure his guests were.
And which, and using synonyms, which guest was that?
Jane.
And did you take steps to have Jane come to the room?
Yes.
And what, if any, understanding did you have about where Jane was coming from to get to the dressing room?
She would have been coming from inside of that particular casino. There was a pit. I believe it was about the
Okay, a pit meaning?
she was
So what do you mean by pit, though?
an open area where guests of the show will stand to see the show.
So an area to watch the show?
Close to the stage, yes.
Close to the stage. Okay. And how, if at all, would Jane get from the pit area to the dressing room?
Someone would have to escort her back.
And what do you mean by that?
Someone, a team member, would have to walk out to that area and walk her back past security to get backstage.
And did Jane end up coming to the dressing room?
Yes.
Okay. And you testified earlier that there were multiple people in the dressing room before Jane arrived, correct?
Correct.
And did that include men and women?
Yes.
And what, if anything, happened regarding the composition of the people who were in the dressing room once Jane arrived?
Well, there Dinner was being served prior to that. So once she arrived, everyone sort of exited through the men.
The men exited.
Yes.
And do you know why that was?
Repeat the question.
Do you know why the men exited the room when Jane came in?
Generally, Mr. Kelly's guest.
Objection. Objection.
Overruled.
You can answer.
Generally, when Mr. Kelly's guests enter a room, most of the men will leave the room.
And why is that?
Why?
Objection.
Overruled. It's based on your observations in working there.
In my observations, yes.
And based on working there, have you learned what, if anything, had what if any protocols did the defendant have about men being in the room when his female guests were there?
It wasn't acceptable.
Now, after the men left the room, who was left in the dressing room?
Myself, the stylist, Mr. Kelly, and Jane.
And when you say the stylist, are you referring to Cash Howard?
Yes.
At some point, did Cash Howard leave the room?
Yes.
And after that, who remained in the room?
Myself, Mr. Kelly, and Jane.
And what, if anything? Well, what, if anything, if any discussions were you having with the defendant when it was just you, the defendant, and Jane in the dressing room?
So we were having a casual conversation about the show. We talked about Cash's birthday, getting her a gift, and we were just really having a casual conversation about work.
And where, if you recall, where in the room was the defendant situated at the time this conversation?
She was sitting in the.
Where was the defendant situated?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
He was sitting on short of a huge ottoman. Ottoman?
Mm-hmm. And how was he sitting on the ottoman?
He was laying back on it with his hands behind his head there.
And where, if anywhere, were you sitting?
I was sitting at the opposite side of it.
And where, if anywhere, do you recall Jane was during this conversation?
She was sitting in a chair right across, right there in front of it.
Now, did Jane participate in the conversation that you and the defendant had about the show?
No.
Was that unusual for her not to participate?
No.
And other than receiving text messages from Jane, did you generally speak to her?
No.
And why didn't you speak to her?
We weren't allowed to commingle with the guests.
Now, after the conversation that you had about the show with the defendant, what, if anything, happened?
Could you elaborate?
Sure. You testified you had a conversation about the show. Is that right?
Objection. That's not her testimony.
Overruled. The question really is just what happened next
Okay.
while you were in the room.
Okay. So we're having a conversation, very casual, very normal. The Jane is sitting across and she gets up and moves a little closer to Mr. Kelly. And
did you see what, if anything, prompted Jane to get up and move closer?
No.
Okay, so what happened next?
So then she got a little closer, and we were kind of wrapped with the conversation that we were having. And
So what do you mean by wrapped?
like we were discussing cool things about the show and Cash birthday, and when she started to move a little closer to Mr. Kelly, I I that was kind of my cue to leave.
Okay. So you used the word wrapped. Do you mean the conversation was finishing up?
We were finishing up, yes.
And then after Jay moved closer to the defendant, what did you see?
Well, I saw her touch his leg, sort of like a massage motion.
And what did you see after that?
And then after that, she got a little closer, and I've already started gathering my things to leave. I just I just saw her move in closer.
What part of her body did you see move in closer and to whom?
Rephrase the question. I'm sorry.
You testified that you saw Jane move in closer.
Yes.
Who did she move in closer to?
Mr. Kelly.
And what part of her body did he move in closer?
The leg area.
In court.
So if you could just describe exactly what you saw.
So all that I saw, exactly what I saw, was her moving in slowly closer to his relined body. She's massaging his legs as she's doing it, and I could see on the left, on the right side of me, not my left, the right side of me, her go sort of face motion, and I walked out.
And where did you see her face motion? What part of her body? His body did you?
The lower part of his body, and I sat. I don't know what happened after that.
When you say the lower part of his body, does that include his penis?
Objection.
Well, over. I mean, you said you saw her head going down. Was that to the below the waist in that area?
In that area.
All right. Next question.
So now you testify you left the room, correct?
Yes.
And why did you leave the room?
I was that was my exit.
Why did you exit?
I was very uncomfortable. That wasn't my business. I was just there to work.
Now, what if anything happened the following day with respect to your employment?
So the following day, I would have already started drafting my exit letter, but the following day we were at a McDonald's, and we were sitting talking about, again, Cash birthday.
Who was at the McDonald's?
Myself, Mr. Kelly, Jane, Joan Sullivan, Hammer, the security guy, the DJ, and one other guy. I don't remember which one. I know there was another person.
And what, if any, discussions did you have with the defendant at the McDonald's?
So we started a conversation about Cash birthday, and I was being accused of telling or spoiling the surprise for Cash. And I think I just, at that moment, I, I just had enough. I started getting, he started yelling at me. He told me that, one second. I'm sorry.
That's all right. You said he started yelling at you. Who is the he you're referring to, and why are you crying?
Mr. Kelly.
And what happened?
Exactly.
So we were having a discussion about cash and her birthday, and he started yelling at me, saying that I spoiled the surprise, and I told her what we discussed previously about what her birthday gift was going to be. And for whatever reason, he started cursing me and then ultimately said that I needed to apologize to the guest. And in this moment, I quit.
So you did spoil. Well, sorry, strike that. And which guest were you referring to that you said he made you apologize to?
Jane,
Why? Jane?
for my behavior when he was pounding the table, I could not agree with it.
And who was pounding the table?
Mr. Kelly,
And did you stop working for the defendant after that day?
yes.
And where, if anywhere, did you travel? I'm sorry. You were still the Connecticut when that happened. Is that right?
Yes.
And where, if anywhere, did you travel to after deciding to stop working for him?
Home,
And where was that?
Atlanta.
Now, during the time you worked for the defendant in 2013 to 2015 time period, were there times where the defendant had you write letters?
I'm sorry, restate that question.
Mhm.
When you worked for the defendant from 2013, they're leading, and approximately 2013 to July of 2015.
Uh-huh.
Approximately during that time period, were there occasions where the defendant told you you needed to write letters?
Yes.
And in that circumstances, did he tell you to do that? In what circumstances did he tell you to do that?
It would have been an apology letter.
And whose idea was it to write those letters?
Mr. Kelly's.
And how, if any, if at all, did he tell you to write them letters?
Uh, I'm not clear on that question.
Of course not.
Okay, there you go, court.
Can I, excuse me, I'm sorry. Just so I could clarify, do you know about how many times you wrote apology letters?
Oh, wow.
Once.
One? Okay, I'm sorry, that's you.
And at whose direction did you do that?
Wow.
Mr. Kelly's.
Was it in response to something in particular?
Yes.
What happened?
So during that time, I was being accused of partnering with booking agents and taking money on the side that I never did.
And so what happened after that?
And so he told me to apologize for it and write it, and I I'm I have a corporate background, so I understand how it works. I apologize for not telling him that one of the bookkeeping agents paid me out of his own commission,
Okay.
but I apologize out of fear.
Okay. And so did you say that in the letter?
Yes.
And did you write the letter on your own? Or did you follow a script? Or how did that?
What?
I was 10,000% scripted, yes.
In what regard?
I was, I was, I was, everything that he would say, I was just so ready not to have to deal with it. I would just write it.
What?
I kept writing and kept writing and kept writing.
Were you by yourself when you wrote it?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Hey.
Thank you, Judge, for asking all my questions that I wanted to
Hello?
ask. I'm sorry, you said it was a script. It was scripted, the letter? No verbal response. Did you just testify that it was scripted, ma'am?
Yes.
And whose script was it?
I was writing everything he was saying just to write it.
And what?
At Mr. Kelly's direction, I would just write.
And what was the defendant? Was the defendant in the room when you were just writing?
Yes.
I'm showing first what's in evidence is Government's Exhibit 424, an envelope with Miss Cheryl Mack's statement. I'm now showing that what's in evidence as Government's Exhibit 424A. Is this your handwriting, ma'am?
Yes.
And just focusing on the beginning of this letter, it states, Mr. Kelly, I'm writing you this letter to apologize to you because I'm aware that you discovered that I accepted money on the side from Reese and Baldy. Is this the letter regarding the booking agent
Yes.
that you just described?
Yes.
And at the bottom, is that your signature?
Yes.
Miss Shahada, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure. Is everybody on the jury okay? I've had you sit here for a little while. Does anyone need a break?
Jury, I guess anything.
Yes. Okay. Let's just take a 10-minute break. Please don't talk about the case at all.
All rise.
The witness can step out. We'll see you in a few minutes. Everybody can step down. I'm just trying to get a sense of time here. Do you have any idea how long you might be?
Sylvia, you said we're done?
Yeah, we at the 2-hour time frame. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
So-
shit, that's just something else, ain't it?
My God. Okay, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
my question is, remember, she's supposedly the one who knows the age of Azriel. She's the one, okay, why? I never heard her say anything, or she told Mr. Kelly how old he was when she was making the arrangement,
I
right?
didn't either. I was thinking about that. I'm like, when you saw that age was, she was 17, flying by herself. You still didn't. You didn't say anything to him. Like,
And
do
then
you know
you-
this girl is only 17?
And then
And
you also saw her in between his legs at the dressing room,
And
going
doing,
down to his penis. So, and you knew her birthday. So why didn't you say anything?
why you didn't say
Exactly.
anything? Yeah.
But you can tell she's lying because
She's lying. She's just making stuff up.
Yeah, she told the judge no that he wasn't in the room, and then Shahada turned right around and questioned her about it, and she said he was in the room. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I saw that. A lot of it's very inconsistent, and it's a lot of leading.
Yeah.
It's and in my opinion, the judge is kind of overstepping. I mean, I know that the government may be inexperienced, as I've heard people say before, but that's not her job to lead them and help them, I don't think. So I think Miss Jennifer is going to pay attention to that as well
Yeah.
by reading the transcripts. My opinion only.
And you know what? I just got a funny feeling. Now, let's go back to Precious.
Mhm.
This was Cheryl's client.
Mhm. She was jealous to me.
She was 17. Now, first they was working together. Then all of a sudden, you're gonna make an abrupt exit, and then here come the lawsuit.
Did you guys pay attention to how they kind of focused on the fact that from Atlanta to Chicago, they kept focusing on, was she living here? So you guys flew here. They kept focusing on the back and forth. So, you know, that's probably where they were saying he was transporting, because they was back and forth, back and forth. And so also, why did Azriel need a Western Union when she was in Vegas or Connecticut?
Right.
She was wanted to go to the mall. She needed to find a Western Union.
Sending that money home.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sending that money home.
So why were you looking for a Western Union? Was someone sending you money, or were you receiving money or sending money?
Sending money.
Sending
Sounds like
money.
to me she probably
She
was
was
sending money.
She was sending money.
Why
Nobody
do
paid
you,
attention to that. We see
Nope.
that, right?
Nope. Why do you need a Western Union, sister?
Yep. She's sending some money home.
She probably got money and was sending it to her pappy and mammy.
I wonder why they didn't ask her about that when they cross-examined Azriel. Oh no, but Cheryl came after her. I would have pulled her back and asked her questions about that.
What, the Western Union?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you need a Western Union for? You have been gone since April 28th. This was May or July or something like that. And you needed a Western Union and a mall. For what?
Sending that money home to mama and daddy until she got tired of sending that money home.
Exactly. I mean, that's important for them to pay attention to as well. In the appeal, maybe. Why did Jane Doe, why did Azrael need a Western Union?
It's just all just crazy to me. All of this. It's just crazy.
All right, good people. It's time for us to end this and let's move on. Thank you, my staff. Well, not staff, but my
Dream
readers,
team.
our dream team. But
No, not dream team.
No.
No.
Oh
Take that back.
no. Wrong team. So you stop giving me names, Tanya.
I'm looking at basketball.
Oh my gosh, she giving me wrong names. Oh my
Sorry.
Lord.
Your
Oh,
readers.
my readers, my reading team.
Reading team.
Thank you. Well, anyway, guys, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much. We'll continue tomorrow, same time.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, Henny.
Good-
Thank
Y'all
you,
have a good
Mimi.
one. Y'all have a good one.
All right,
Good night,
guys.
everyone.
Good night.
All right, good night. Thank you,
Good
guys.
night.
Love you guys.
Love you
Love
too.
you
Bye.
too.
Bye.
Love you.